Walk into any car dealership in America, and the salesperson will tell you every vehicle on that lot is reliable. That's their job. They get paid when you sign. But walk into an independent repair shop, the kind with grease-stained floors and a waiting room that smells like coffee and motor oil. Ask the guy behind the counter which brands he refuses to work on. That's when you get the truth. Because mechanics don't make money when you buy the car. They make money when it breaks. And if they're turning away work, that tells you something important. It tells you the vehicle is such a nightmare that the labor isn't worth the headache. I spent 3 weeks talking to independent mechanics, cross-referencing their complaints with NHTSA data, J.D. Power reliability studies, and Consumer Reports surveys covering over 380,000 vehicles. What I found wasn't surprising to anyone who works on cars for a living, but it might surprise you. These are the 5 car brands that mechanics across America are refusing to touch, and the reasons why should change how you shop for your next vehicle. Let's start with the brand that came up in almost every conversation I had, Stellantis. That's the corporate parent of Jeep, Dodge, Chrysler, and Ram. And the problem isn't one bad model. It's a systemic failure that spans their entire lineup. The biggest offender is the ZF 9-speed automatic transmission. Stellantis started putting this transmission in everything around 2014. Jeep Cherokee, Chrysler 200, Dodge Dart, the Pacifica minivan, even some Ram trucks. The theory was simple. More gears means better fuel economy. But the execution was a disaster. Owners started reporting harsh shifts within the first 20,000 miles. The transmission would hunt between gears on the highway, never settling into a comfortable cruise. Some vehicles would lurch forward at stop signs. Others would hesitate for 3 or 4 seconds before responding to the accelerator. The NHTSA complaint database tells the story. Over 4,800 complaints specifically mentioning transmission problems in Stellantis vehicles equipped with the 9-speed. Multiple technical service bulletins. Software reflashes that sometimes made the problem better and sometimes made it worse. But here's what really kills mechanics: the repair process. To properly diagnose a 9-speed transmission issue, you need Stellantis-specific diagnostic software. You need training on their proprietary systems. And when the transmission finally needs replacement, you're looking at a part that costs between $4,000 and $7,000 before labor. One mechanic in Ohio told me he stopped working on Stellantis products entirely after a Jeep Cherokee owner came back 4 times for the same shifting complaint. He replaced sensors. He updated software. He checked the valve body. Nothing fixed it permanently. The owner eventually traded the vehicle in at a loss. That mechanic now has a sign in his shop. It says, "No Stellantis products." He told me he'd rather lose the business than lose his reputation. J.D. Power's 2026 Vehicle Dependability Study ranked Chrysler and Dodge in the bottom 5 brands for long-term reliability. Jeep didn't do much better. This isn't one bad year. This is a pattern that's been building for over a decade. Now let's talk about Nissan. If you've been shopping for an affordable sedan or crossover in the last 15 years, someone probably recommended a Nissan. The Altima, the Rogue, the Sentra. Good-looking vehicles at competitive prices. But there's a reason those prices are competitive. Nissan has been using a continuously variable transmission called the Jatco CVT in almost every vehicle they sell. And these transmissions have a failure rate that's genuinely alarming. A CVT works differently than a traditional automatic. Instead of fixed gears, it uses a belt and pulley system to provide infinite gear ratios. When it works, it's smooth. When it fails, and it fails often, you're looking at a complete transmission replacement. The symptoms usually start around 60,000 to 80,000 miles. Shuddering during acceleration, a whining noise that gets louder over time. Sudden loss of power on the highway, and eventually, complete failure with no warning. NHTSA has received over 6,000 complaints related to Nissan CVT failures. That's not counting the people who traded their vehicles in without filing a formal complaint. Consumer Reports flagged the Nissan Rogue and Altima specifically for below-average transmission reliability. Nissan did extend warranty coverage on some CVT units to 84,000 miles. But that's cold comfort when the average American drives about 14,000 miles per year. You might be out of warranty before your 5th year of ownership. Mechanics hate working on Nissan CVTs for a simple reason. You can't rebuild them economically. When one fails, you're installing a remanufactured unit or a new one. Either way, the customer is looking at $3,500 to $5,000 for parts and labor, and there's no guarantee the replacement won't fail the same way. I talked to a transmission specialist in Texas who keeps a running count. He's replaced 47 Nissan CVTs in the last 2 years alone, all of them in vehicles under 100,000 miles. He calls the Nissan Rogue the full employment act for transmission shops, but even he admits he's started turning away some Nissan work. The customers get upset when the repair costs more than the vehicle is worth, and that happens more often than you'd think. Next on the list, Hyundai and Kia. These two brands share a corporate parent, and they share a problem. The Theta 2 engine family has been the subject of one of the largest engine recalls in automotive history. The issue is a manufacturing defect that allows metal shavings to contaminate the oil system. Over time, these shavings cause bearing failure, and when a bearing fails in the Theta 2 engine, the engine seizes. Sometimes it catches fire. Between 2011 and 2019, millions of vehicles were affected. The Hyundai Sonata and Santa Fe, the Kia Optima and Sorento. The problem was so widespread that Hyundai and Kia extended engine warranties to 10 years or 100,000 miles on affected vehicles. But here's what the warranty doesn't cover: the tow truck, the rental car while you wait for a replacement engine, the inconvenience of being stranded on the side of the highway. NHTSA investigated these engines after reports of over 3,000 fires. The agency ultimately concluded that Hyundai and Kia didn't recall the vehicles quickly enough and fined both companies a combined $137 million. Independent mechanics have a different problem with these brands. Hyundai and Kia have been aggressive about requiring dealer-only repairs for warranty work. If you take your vehicle to an independent shop, even for unrelated maintenance, the dealer might claim that voids your warranty. This creates a situation where mechanics can't touch newer Hyundai and Kia products without risking a fight with the dealer network. And for older vehicles that are out of warranty, the question becomes whether the engine is a ticking time bomb. One mechanic in Florida told me he runs the VIN on every Hyundai and Kia that comes into his shop. If it's on the recall list and the engine hasn't been replaced yet, he sends the customer to the dealer. He doesn't want to be the last person who touched the engine before it fails. Now we get to a brand that represents a different kind of problem: Land Rover. Land Rovers don't fail because of cheap parts or manufacturing defects. They fail because they're so complicated that even the mechanics who specialize in them can't keep up. Modern Land Rovers and Range Rovers are packed with electronic systems that control everything from the suspension to the door locks. The air suspension alone has multiple height sensors, compressors, and control modules that all need to work in perfect harmony. When something goes wrong, diagnosing the problem requires software that costs thousands of dollars annually to license. It requires training that Land Rover makes available primarily to dealer technicians. And it requires parts that are only available through the dealer network, at prices that will make your eyes water. J.D. Power consistently ranks Land Rover at or near the bottom for vehicle dependability. The 2026 study showed Land Rover owners reporting an average of 244 problems per 100 vehicles. The industry average was 185. One mechanic in Colorado told me he worked at a Land Rover dealer for 6 years before going independent. He thought he could specialize in European luxury vehicles and carve out a niche. Within 2 years, he stopped accepting Land Rovers entirely. The breaking point was a Range Rover Sport with an intermittent electrical gremlin. The vehicle would randomly go into limp mode. Sometimes the dash lights would flicker. Sometimes the infotainment screen would reboot while driving. He spent 40 hours diagnosing the problem, replaced 2 control modules, updated software, checked every ground connection in the vehicle. The problem persisted. The customer eventually sold the vehicle at auction. That mechanic now drives a 10-year-old Toyota Tacoma. He says he'll never own another Land Rover as long as he lives. The 5th brand on this list might surprise you: Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi hasn't sold a lot of vehicles in America for years. Their lineup has shrunk to basically 3 models: the Outlander Sport, and the Mirage. You might think that means they're focused on quality over quantity. You would be wrong. The problem with Mitsubishi isn't that their vehicles are unreliable, it's that getting parts for them is becoming impossible. Mitsubishi's market share in the United States has dropped below 0.5%. That means parts suppliers have little incentive to stock Mitsubishi components. When something breaks on a Mitsubishi that isn't covered by a common platform, you might wait weeks for the part to arrive. One mechanic in Michigan told me about a customer with a Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross that needed a specific sensor for the AWD system. The part was backordered for 11 weeks. The customer had to rent a car for almost 3 months while waiting for a sensor that cost $180. Mechanics aren't turning away Mitsubishis because they're hard to work on. They're turning them away because they can't get the parts. And when a customer's vehicle sits in your lot for 2 months waiting for a sensor, that's taking up space you could use for vehicles you can actually fix. There's another factor that mechanics mentioned about Mitsubishi: resale value. These vehicles depreciate so quickly that a major repair often exceeds the vehicle's worth. A customer with a 7-year-old Outlander facing a $2,500 transmission repair has to ask themselves whether the vehicle is even worth fixing. More often than not, the answer is no. And that leaves the mechanic in the awkward position of telling a customer they should junk their vehicle rather than repair it. So what does all of this mean for you? It means the people who actually work on cars for a living see a different reality than the one you see in advertisements. They see the vehicles that come back again and again for the same problems. They see the customers who are upside down on their loans because their transmission failed at 65,000 miles. They see the engineer's mistakes up close, every single day. The brands on this list aren't here because of one bad model year or one unlucky batch of parts. They're here because of systemic issues that affect thousands of vehicles across multiple years. When a mechanic turns away work, that's not laziness. That's professional judgment. They know that some vehicles aren't worth the liability. You want to know what car to buy? Ask the guy who has to fix them. If you found this useful, subscribe. I cover product quality, planned obsolescence, and the things manufacturers don't want you to know. New videos drop regularly.